Welcome to another chilling dive into the hidden corners of American history, where the line between truth and terror blurs. Today, we uncover a story so shocking it was buried for over a century, until now. Imagine a boy, just 13, trapped beneath a mountain of rock and iron for 5 days, only to emerge alive, defying every medical expectation of the 19th century. But his survival was just the beginning of a nightmare that would expose a conspiracy stretching from Georgia's iron mines to the battlefields of the Civil War. Buckle up, because this tale from 1861 will leave you questioning what it truly means to survive. Let's get started. The medical records from Clark County, Georgia, tell of a case that defied every principle of 19th century medicine. A 13-year-old boy buried alive for 5 days beneath tons of iron ore and timber emerged from what should have been his grave with injuries that physicians declared unsurvivable. Yet William Carter not only lived, he endured months of increasingly brutal medical experiments that would have killed grown men. The Confederate Army's own Surgeon General called his survival an impossibility of human physiology. What the official records don't reveal is why young William disappeared from all documentation in April of 1862, and why Dr. Edward Langley, the physician treating him, was found dead in his clinic with his own surgical instruments embedded in his chest. The truth about what happened in those Georgia mines would challenge everything the medical community thought they knew about human survival and expose a conspiracy that reached from the battlefields of Tennessee to the operating tables of Athens. Spring of 1861 brought desperation to the hills surrounding Athens, Georgia. The Confederate war machine demanded iron, tons of it, to forge cannons, rifles, and railroad tracks that would keep the Southern cause alive. The Redstone Iron Works, nestled in the pine-covered valleys 15 miles northeast of the growing city, had become one of the most crucial industrial sites in the entire Confederacy. But the war had stripped the region of its strongest workers. Every able-bodied man between 16 and 50 had marched off to fight Yankees, leaving behind a workforce of graying veterans, boys barely old enough to swing a pickaxe, and enslaved laborers whose owners rented them to the mines for Confederate currency that grew more worthless each month. William Carter had turned 13 that February, but his hands were already scarred from 9 months of working the deepest shafts of the Redstone complex. His father, Henry Carter, had died at the Battle of Antietam, leaving behind a widow and 3 children in a company house that would be reclaimed if the family couldn't pay the monthly rent. William's mother, Eliza, took in washing from the bachelor miners, but her son's wages, 60 cents a day, plus company script for the store, made the difference between eating cornbread and eating nothing at all. The boy had learned to read the mountain's moods, to listen for the subtle groans and shifts that warned of instability in the tunnels. The older miners respected his intuition, calling him Owl Eyes, for his ability to navigate the darkest passages without stumbling. But even the most experienced miners couldn't predict everything that could go wrong in the labyrinthine network of shafts that honeycombed the hillsides. Dr. Edward Langley had arrived at Redstone in December of 1861, carrying credentials from the Medical College of Georgia and an appointment as company physician signed by Confederate officials in Atlanta. At 36, Langley possessed the kind of sharp, calculating intelligence that made him invaluable to the mining operation. He could set bones shattered by cave-ins, stitch wounds from pickaxe accidents, and keep men working even when fever or dysentery should have sent them to bed for weeks. The miners found Langley unsettling. He asked too many questions about their injuries, took too many notes, and seemed more interested in studying their wounds than healing them quickly. But in a time when any medical attention was better than none, they endured his peculiar methods and intensive examinations. What none of them knew was that Dr. Langley maintained 2 sets of medical records. The official ledger kept for company inspectors and Confederate Army physicians who occasionally visited the site documented standard treatments and expected recovery times. But hidden in a locked drawer of his desk, Langley kept detailed journals filled with observations, measurements, and theories about human endurance that would have horrified his patients if they could read his cramped handwriting. The spring of 1861 had been wet, and the mountain streams that normally trickled through the lower tunnels had swollen to rushing torrents. The constant moisture weakened the timber supports that held up the mine ceilings, and several minor cave-ins had already claimed 4 lives. But the Confederate Army's demands for iron never decreased, and the mine supervisors pushed their workers to extract ore from increasingly dangerous areas. William worked the third shift from midnight until noon, descending into shafts that plunged more than 250 feet below the surface. His job was to load iron ore into wooden carts that would be hauled to the surface by mule teams, backbreaking work that left his shoulders aching and his lungs coated with metallic dust. But it was honest work, and it kept his family from starvation. On the morning of March 10, 1861, William Carter would descend into the depths of the Redstone mine for what should have been the last time. The explosion came at 6:47 in the morning, just as the sun was beginning to burn through the Georgia mist. William had been working in shaft number 6, the deepest and most productive tunnel in the entire complex, when the blast foreman's charges detonated prematurely in an adjacent passage. Samuel Reed, the blast foreman, had been setting black powder charges to fracture a particularly stubborn vein of iron ore. The technique was dangerous but effective. Drill holes in strategic locations, pack them with gunpowder, light the fuses, and retreat to a safe distance while the explosion shattered tons of rock. But something went wrong that morning. Perhaps the fuses were cut too short, or maybe moisture had affected the powder's burning rate. Whatever the cause, the charges exploded while Reed was still in the tunnel, and the concussion brought down not just the intended rock face, but also the ceiling supports in 3 adjacent shafts. William was loading ore into a cart approximately 50 feet from the blast when the mountain seemed to convulse around him. The wooden support timbers cracked like rifle shots, and chunks of stone the size of wagon wheels began crashing down from the tunnel ceiling. The oil lamp attached to his cap flickered and died, plunging him into absolute darkness, just as the roar of collapsing rock filled the air. He had perhaps 3 seconds to react, 3 seconds to save his life or die beneath tons of Georgia granite. Years later, survivors would debate whether William had been lucky or smart in his choice. As the ceiling collapsed around him, he dove beneath the iron ore cart he had been loading, a heavy wooden vehicle reinforced with iron bands and built to withstand the rough handling of mine work. The cart probably saved his life, but it also trapped him. When the avalanche of stone finally settled, William found himself in a pocket of space barely 3 feet high and 4 feet wide, with the overturned cart forming a crude shelter above him. But he was completely sealed in by debris, trapped in a rocky tomb more than 250 feet below the surface. Above ground, the rescue efforts began immediately. Mine Superintendent Charles Whitaker organized teams of workers who attacked the collapsed shafts with pickaxes, shovels, and their bare hands. But the cave-in had been massive, filling nearly a quarter-mile of tunnels with broken stone. 6 men were known to be trapped, including William Carter and blast foreman Reed. Eliza Carter stood vigil at the mine entrance, her face streaked with tears and coal dust as she watched the rescue teams work. Other wives and mothers joined her in a growing crowd of desperate families, all hoping for miraculous news that never came. By the 2nd day, hope began to fade. By the 4th day, the rescue workers were digging more carefully, expecting to recover bodies rather than survivors. Dr. Langley observed the rescue efforts with clinical detachment, making notes about the psychological effects of prolonged stress on the families and documenting the physical toll that non-stop digging was taking on the rescue workers. He seemed particularly interested in Eliza Carter's behavior, recording detailed observations about her physical deterioration and emotional responses in his private journal. On the morning of March 15th, 5 days after the explosion, the rescue teams finally broke through to shaft number 6. What they found defied explanation. Samuel Reed and 4 other miners were dead, crushed by falling stones, but William Carter was alive. The boy was unconscious when they pulled him from his rocky tomb. His body broken and battered, his lips cracked from dehydration, his clothes torn and bloodied. But he was breathing. Dr. Langley was summoned immediately, and his examination revealed injuries that should have been fatal. 4 ribs were broken. His right arm was fractured in 3 places. He had sustained a severe concussion, and his body was covered with deep lacerations from sharp stone fragments. But somehow, impossibly, William Carter was alive after 5 days without food, water, or medical attention. trapped in a space that should have been his grave. Dr. Langley's fascination with the boy's survival began immediately, and it would soon become an obsession that would consume them both. The news of William Carter's survival spread through the Georgia mining district like wildfire through dry pine needles. Miners who had worked these hills for decades claimed they had never seen anything like it. 5 days buried alive. It was the kind of survival story that seemed to belong in the pages of a dime novel rather than the harsh reality of Confederate Georgia. Dr. Langley transported William to the company infirmary, a crude medical facility housed in a converted mining office building near the entrance to the Redstone Works. The building contained 5 beds, basic surgical equipment, and a small pharmacy stocked with laudanum, mercury preparations, and other medicines that passed for advanced medical care in rural Georgia. For the first week, William drifted in and out of consciousness, his body fighting infections from his numerous wounds and struggling to recover from severe dehydration. Eliza Carter rarely left his bedside, sleeping in a chair beside his bed and accepting food from other mining families who understood her situation. Dr. Langley encouraged her constant presence, claiming that a mother's care was essential for recovery. But Langley's interest in William extended far beyond normal medical attention. Each day he spent hours examining the boy's wounds, measuring their dimensions, documenting their healing progress, and recording detailed observations about William's vital signs, reflexes, and responses to various stimuli. He photographed the wounds using a primitive camera he had ordered from Savannah, creating a visual record that he claimed was for medical science. The photographs were unusual for several reasons. Most physicians of the era rarely had access to photographic equipment, and the detailed documentation Langley was creating went far beyond what was necessary for treating a mining accident victim. But Eliza Carter, exhausted and frightened, accepted Langley's explanations that everything he was doing was designed to help her son recover. As William slowly regained consciousness, he began to display remarkable physical resilience. His broken bones seemed to be healing faster than Langley had expected. His lacerations were closing without the infections that typically plagued mine accident victims, and his overall recovery was proceeding at what the doctor described in his private notes as an unprecedented rate. By the end of March, William was sitting up in bed, eating solid food, and asking when he could return home. But Dr. Langley insisted that the boy needed continued medical observation. He convinced Eliza that William's internal injuries might be more serious than they appeared, and that premature release from medical care could result in sudden deterioration or death. Eliza, terrified of losing her son after coming so close to burying him, agreed to Langley's recommendation for extended treatment. The doctor arranged for William to remain in the infirmary indefinitely, with all medical expenses paid by the mining company as part of their worker injury compensation program. What Eliza didn't know was that the mining company's records showed William Carter as having died in the cave-in, along with the other trapped miners. Officially, according to the company books and Confederate Army supply reports, the boy no longer existed. During the first week of April, Langley began what he called advanced therapeutic treatments, designed to ensure William's complete recovery. These treatments involved increasingly invasive medical procedures that Langley claimed were necessary to prevent long-term complications from the boy's injuries. The first treatment involved bloodletting, the removal of corrupted blood that Langley claimed was preventing proper healing. Using a sharp lancet, he opened veins in William's arms and allowed blood to flow into metal basins, a procedure that left the boy weak and dizzy. When Eliza questioned the necessity of removing so much blood from her already injured son, Langley explained that bloodletting was a standard medical practice endorsed by the finest physicians in Savannah and Charleston. The second treatment involved the administration of mercury preparations, which Langley claimed would prevent blood poisoning from William's numerous wounds. The mercury was mixed with alcohol and administered in doses that caused severe stomach cramps, vomiting, and diarrhea. Again, Langley assured Eliza that these side effects were normal and indicated that the medicine was working to purge poisons from the boy's system. As April progressed into May, Langley's treatments became increasingly severe. He began administering what he called tolerance tests, procedures designed to determine how much physical stress William's body could endure without suffering permanent damage. These tests included exposing the boy to extreme temperatures, administering controlled doses of various poisons, and subjecting him to physical stress that would have been torture if conducted on a healthy individual. Eliza began to question Langley's methods, but the doctor's explanations were always convincing. William's survival of the cave-in had been so miraculous, Langley argued, that extraordinary medical care was required to ensure his continued health. Any mother who truly loved her son, he implied, would want him to receive the most advanced medical treatment available, regardless of how uncomfortable those treatments might be. But late at night, when the infirmary was quiet and Langley had retired to his quarters, Eliza sometimes heard her son crying softly in his bed. When she asked William about his tears, he would only say that the treatments hurt and that he wanted to go home. The boy seemed to be growing smaller and weaker rather than stronger. Despite Langley's assurances that his recovery was progressing normally, by June of 1861, 3 months after the cave-in, William Carter had become Dr. Edward Langley's most intensive patient and his most closely guarded secret. The summer heat of 1861 turned the Georgia hills into a furnace, and the mining operations at Redstone slowed to accommodate workers who collapsed from exhaustion in the sweltering tunnels. But inside the company infirmary, Dr. Langley's medical treatments continued with methodical precision, shielded from the outside world by thick stone walls and heavy curtains that blocked both sunlight and curious eyes. William's condition had become a puzzle that consumed Langley's every waking hour. The boy's initial recovery from the cave-in had been remarkable, almost supernatural in its speed and completeness. But the extended medical treatments had revealed something even more fascinating. William seemed to possess an unusual tolerance for physical stress that defied medical understanding. In his private journal, Langley documented experiment after experiment with the clinical detachment of a natural scientist, studying an interesting specimen. He recorded William's reactions to graduated doses of opium, noting that the boy could tolerate amounts that would render a grown man unconscious. He tested the limits of William's pain tolerance by applying heated metal instruments to his skin, measuring how long the boy could endure various degrees of burns before losing consciousness. Most remarkably, Langley discovered that William recovered from these medical procedures faster than seemed humanly possible. Wounds that should have taken weeks to heal closed in days. Blood loss that should have left him weak and anemic seemed to have no lasting effects. Even deliberate poisoning with arsenic and mercury compounds produced only temporary symptoms before the boy's body somehow neutralized the toxins. Eliza Carter watched her son's transformation with growing alarm. William was becoming thin and pale, his eyes developing a haunted expression that reminded her of soldiers she had seen returning from the worst battles of the war. He rarely spoke anymore, answering questions with single words or simple nods. But when she asked Langley about these changes, the doctor assured her that such effects were normal for patients recovering from severe trauma. "The boy's mind is processing the miracle of his survival," Langley explained during one of their conversations. "Such psychological adjustments are common among patients who have experienced near-death situations. With continued medical care, I'm confident that William will emerge from this treatment stronger and healthier than ever before." But Langley's true motivations were becoming clear in the letters he was secretly writing to medical colleagues throughout the South and beyond. Using a Confederate Army courier service that carried medical supplies between military hospitals, Langley had begun corresponding with physicians in Atlanta, Savannah, and even through intermediaries with doctors in northern cities like Baltimore and New York. His letters described a medical discovery of unprecedented significance. A human being who appeared to possess extraordinary resistance to physical trauma, disease, and toxic substances. Such a discovery, Langley wrote, could revolutionize military medicine by revealing the secrets of human endurance and survival under extreme conditions. More importantly, Langley had begun to suspect that William's unusual constitution might be replicated in other individuals through controlled medical intervention. If the factors that gave William his remarkable healing abilities could be identified and reproduced, the applications would be limitless. Soldiers who could recover from battlefield wounds in days instead of weeks, workers who could endure industrial accidents that would normally prove fatal, a new breed of human being adapted for survival in the harsh realities of the 19th century. The financial implications were equally staggering. Medical discoveries of this magnitude could be worth fortunes to the physician who documented and publicized them. Langley had already received preliminary inquiries from medical colleges and pharmaceutical companies interested in purchasing his research data, assuming his claims could be verified through independent observation. But Langley's secret correspondence had attracted attention from quarters he had not anticipated. By July of 1861, his letters were being intercepted and read by Confederate intelligence operatives, who were monitoring all communications between Southern medical facilities and potential enemy contacts. The fact that Langley was communicating with Northern physicians during wartime raised immediate suspicions about his loyalty to the Confederate cause. Captain Daniel Hargrove of the Confederate Secret Service arrived at Redstone on July 12th, ostensibly to inspect the mining operation's security arrangements. But his real interest was in investigating Dr. Langley's unusual medical research and determining whether the physician posed a security risk to Confederate operations. Hargrove's investigation quickly revealed discrepancies in the official records. According to mining company documentation, William Carter had died in the March cave-in and had been buried in the company cemetery along with the other victims. But according to Langley's medical supplies requisitions, the infirmary had been treating a long-term patient for more than 4 months, consuming unusually large quantities of experimental medications and specialized equipment. When Hargrove confronted Langley about these discrepancies, the doctor explained that he was conducting authorized medical research under the auspices of the Confederate Army Medical Department. He produced official-looking documents that authorized him to pursue investigations into battlefield medicine and trauma recovery techniques that could benefit Confederate military operations. But Hargrove's experience with forged documents made him suspicious of Langley's paperwork. More importantly, his interviews with mining workers and local residents had uncovered disturbing rumors about the activities taking place in the company infirmary. Several miners reported hearing screams and crying from the medical building during late-night hours. Others claimed that Langley had been purchasing unusual supplies, surgical instruments, chemical compounds, and photographic equipment that seemed unrelated to treating routine mining injuries. Eliza Carter's testimony proved most damaging. Under gentle questioning from Hargrove, she described months of increasingly severe medical treatments that seemed designed to harm rather than heal her son. She admitted her growing suspicions that Langley's procedures were unnecessary and possibly dangerous, but explained that her fear of losing William had made her reluctant to challenge a physician's authority. Hargrove's investigation culminated in a search of Langley's private quarters on July 18th. Hidden behind a false panel in the doctor's desk, investigators discovered Langley's secret journal and his correspondence with medical contacts throughout the country. The documents revealed the full scope of Langley's experiments on William Carter and his plans to market his research findings to the highest bidder. But the most damning evidence was a series of photographs showing William's injuries and recovery process over the previous 4 months. The images documented wounds, surgical procedures, and medical treatments that went far beyond anything justified by the boy's original cave-in injuries. Some of the photographs showed injuries that appeared to have been inflicted deliberately, with careful attention to documenting their healing progress. Captain Hargrove placed Dr. Edward Langley under arrest on charges of treason, conducting unauthorized medical experiments, and child endangerment. But before Langley could be transported to Atlanta for military trial, events at the Redstone Infirmary would take a turn that no one had anticipated. The arrest of Dr. Langley created chaos at the Redstone mining operation. Confederate intelligence officers sealed the company infirmary, confiscated all medical records, and began preparing to transport both Langley and William Carter to Atlanta for further investigation. But the complexity of the case, combined with the ongoing demands of the war effort, meant that official proceedings would be delayed for several weeks. Langley was confined to a guarded room in the mining company's administrative building, while investigators continued gathering evidence. William was moved from the infirmary to his family's company house, where Eliza Carter could care for him, while Confederate authorities decided what to do with a child who had officially been dead for 4 months. The boy's return home should have been a joyous occasion, but Eliza was horrified by what months of Langley's treatments had done to her son. William weighed barely 85 pounds, his body marked by scars from countless medical procedures, his behavior alternating between periods of silent withdrawal and sudden inexplicable outbursts of rage. During his first night at home, William woke screaming from nightmares about medical instruments and burning liquids. He refused to eat, claiming that food might contain medicine that would make him sick. When Eliza tried to examine his scars, he recoiled from her touch as if expecting pain. The confident, cheerful boy who had worked in the mines had been replaced by a traumatized child who flinched at shadows. But as the days passed, something unexpected began to happen. Away from Langley's constant medical interventions, William started to recover, not just physically, but mentally. His appetite returned, his weight increased, and he began speaking in complete sentences for the first time in months. More importantly, he started asking questions about what had happened to him and why. Eliza tried to shield her son from the full truth about Langley's experiments, but William's questions became increasingly specific. He wanted to know why the doctor had given him medicines that made him sick, why certain procedures had been painful when Langley claimed they were for his own good, and why he had been forced to submit to treatments that seemed designed to hurt rather than heal. As William's mental clarity returned, so did his memories of the previous months. He began describing Langley's procedures in detail, recounting conversations and events that Eliza had not witnessed because they had occurred when she was absent from the infirmary. His descriptions painted a picture of systematic abuse disguised as medical treatment, conducted by a physician who viewed his patient as an experimental subject rather than a human being. The boy's recovery also revealed something else, a burning anger that seemed to grow stronger each day. William had begun to understand that he had been victimized, that his trust had been betrayed, and that his suffering had been deliberate and unnecessary. The quiet, compliant patient who had endured months of torture was being replaced by a young person whose fury was matched only by his determination to ensure that Langley never hurt another child. Meanwhile, Langley's situation was becoming increasingly desperate. The Confederate intelligence investigation had uncovered evidence of his correspondence with Union physicians, his plans to sell medical research to Northern buyers, and his systematic falsification of official records. The charges against him now included treason, espionage, and conduct unbecoming a Confederate officer, any one of which could result in execution by military tribunal. But Langley's most immediate concern was the possibility that William Carter would testify against him. The boy's detailed memories of the medical experiments could corroborate the evidence found in Langley's secret journal, providing prosecutors with a compelling case that would be difficult to defend against. From his guarded confinement, Langley began planning his escape. He knew that Captain Hargrove was preparing to transport him to Atlanta within the week, and that once he reached the Confederate capital, his chances of avoiding execution would be minimal. His only hope was to flee before the transport could be arranged, but that would require eliminating the witnesses who could testify against him. On the evening of August 2, 1861, Langley implemented his escape plan. Using medical knowledge gained from years of treating injured miners, he feigned symptoms of severe abdominal pain that suggested appendicitis or intestinal obstruction. The guards, fearing that their prisoner might die before reaching trial, summoned the nearest available physician, an elderly country doctor named Nathaniel Brooks, who lived 12 miles from the mining site. Dr. Brooks's examination confirmed Langley's symptoms, and he recommended immediate surgery to prevent potentially fatal complications. The procedure would require moving Langley to better facilities and removing his shackles to allow proper medical access. During the confusion of preparing for emergency surgery, Langley overpowered his elderly colleague, stole the man's medical bag and horse, and fled into the Georgia wilderness. But Langley's escape had a specific destination. Before leaving the area permanently, he intended to silence the one witness whose testimony could destroy him completely. He knew where the Carter family lived. He knew that William was still weak from months of medical abuse, and he knew that a child's accidental death during a home invasion would be attributed to common wartime violence rather than systematic murder. Langley reached the Carter house just after midnight on August 3rd, carrying the stolen medical bag that contained the surgical instruments he had used for months to torture William. He intended to make the boy's death look like the result of injuries sustained during a robbery, eliminating the witness while providing himself with an alibi for his escape. But as Langley approached the small company house where William was sleeping, he failed to consider one crucial factor. The boy he had spent months tormenting was no longer the compliant, trusting child who had submitted to medical procedures without resistance. William Carter had been waiting for Dr. Edward Langley to come for him. And when the physician finally arrived, the boy was ready. The sound of breaking glass woke Eliza Carter from an uneasy sleep. At first she thought the noise might have come from outside, perhaps a raccoon knocking over bottles left on a neighbor's porch, or the wind rattling loose shutters on the company house. But when she heard careful footsteps moving across the kitchen floor below her bedroom, she knew that someone had entered her home. Eliza reached for the shotgun that had belonged to her late husband, a weapon she had kept loaded beside her bed since William's return from the infirmary. But as she crept toward the stairs, she discovered that her son was no longer in his bed. The blankets were thrown back, and William's clothes were missing from the chair where he had left them before retiring. The boy had heard Langley's approach long before his mother was awakened. Months of medical torture had heightened William's senses, making him acutely aware of sounds, movements, and changes in his environment that might signal approaching danger. He had been expecting Langley to come for him, not because of supernatural intuition, but because he understood that eliminating witnesses was the logical next step for a man facing execution for treason. William had spent the previous week preparing for this confrontation, using skills learned from 9 months of mining work and 13 years of survival in rural Georgia. He had crafted weapons from materials available in the company house. A kitchen knife had been sharpened to razor keenness on a grinding stone borrowed from a neighbor. Lengths of rope had been cut and knotted into snares that could trip or entangle an intruder. Most importantly, William had used his intimate knowledge of the house's layout to prepare hiding places and escape routes that would give him advantages over an adult opponent. When Langley entered through the kitchen window, William was waiting in the darkness behind the wood stove, his body pressed against the wall in a position that made him invisible to someone entering from outside. The boy watched as Langley moved carefully through the kitchen, his stolen medical bag clutched in one hand and a surgical scalpel gleaming in the moonlight in the other. Langley's plan was simple: kill the boy quickly and quietly, then stage the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong. He would take a few valuable items from the house to support the theft theory, then continue his flight toward the Tennessee border, where he could disappear into the chaos of wartime displacement and eventually make his way north to sell his medical research. But Langley had made a crucial error in his understanding of his intended victim. The months of medical experimentation had not broken William's spirit. They had forged it into something harder and more dangerous than anything Langley could have anticipated. The compliant patient who had submitted to torture because he trusted adult authority no longer existed. In his place was a young person who understood that survival sometimes required violence, and who had learned to view other human beings with the same clinical detachment that Langley had once shown toward him. William allowed Langley to search the downstairs rooms, waiting until the physician began climbing the stairs toward the bedrooms where he expected to find his sleeping victims. As Langley placed his foot on the third step, the one William knew would creak loudly enough to mask other sounds, the boy emerged from hiding and struck. The kitchen knife went into Langley's lower back with the precision of someone who had watched medical procedures for months and understood human anatomy. William had aimed for the kidney, knowing that such a wound would be incapacitating without being immediately fatal. He wanted Langley alive and conscious for what would happen next. Langley screamed and stumbled, his medical bag crashing to the floor and spilling surgical instruments across the wooden planks. He tried to turn toward his attacker, but William had already moved, using ropes to trip the injured physician and send him tumbling down the stairs to land in a groaning heap on the kitchen floor. Eliza Carter appeared at the top of the stairs with her husband's shotgun, but what she saw below defied her understanding. Her 13-year-old son was standing over the fallen doctor, holding a bloodied knife in one hand and gathering scattered surgical instruments with the other. The boy's face showed no emotion, no anger, no fear, no satisfaction. He looked like someone completing a necessary but unpleasant task. "William," Eliza whispered, "what are you doing?" The boy looked up at his mother with eyes that seemed decades older than his actual age. "He came to kill us, Mama, just like he tried to kill me in the infirmary, but I'm not going to let him hurt anybody else." Langley was conscious but unable to move effectively due to the knife wound and his fall down the stairs. He looked up at William with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "You don't understand," he gasped. "I was trying to help you. The treatments, they were making you stronger." "No," William replied quietly. "You were seeing how much pain I could stand before I died. You were going to sell what you learned to whoever paid you the most money. And tonight, you came here to kill me, so I couldn't tell anybody what you did." The boy began arranging Langley's surgical instruments on the kitchen table with the same methodical precision he had observed during months of medical procedures. Scalpels, forceps, bone saws, and syringes were laid out in neat rows, each instrument positioned exactly as Langley had always arranged them before beginning his treatments. "William, no," Eliza pleaded from the top of the stairs. "We'll turn him over to the authorities. Captain Hargrove will make sure he's punished." But William shook his head. "The authorities didn't stop him before, Mama. They knew what he was doing to me, but they let it happen because they wanted to see what he would discover. If we turn him over to them, they'll just find another doctor to continue his work on some other child." Langley tried to crawl toward the back door, but William had prepared for that possibility as well. More ropes stretched across the floor in patterns that would tangle anyone attempting to escape. The physician found himself trapped as effectively as William had been trapped in the collapsed mine shaft. "Please," Langley whispered, "I have money, research notes that could be valuable. I can make you rich if you let me go." William selected a scalpel from the arranged instruments, testing its sharpness against his thumb in a gesture he had seen Langley perform hundreds of times. "You taught me a lot about medicine, Dr. Langley. You showed me how much pain a person can feel before they die. You explained how different poisons work on the human body. You demonstrated how to use these instruments to cause maximum suffering while keeping someone alive." The boy moved closer to Langley, his expression still showing no emotion. "Now I'm going to show you how good a student I was." Eliza Carter closed her eyes and turned away from the stairs. She had seen enough violence in her life, had lost her husband to war, and nearly lost her son to medical torture. She knew that what was about to happen in her kitchen was justice, even if it was justice administered by the hands of a child who had been forced to grow up too quickly. The sounds that came from below lasted for nearly an hour. When they finally stopped, William climbed the stairs to his mother's room, washed the blood from his hands in her wash basin, and crawled into bed beside her, as he had done when he was much younger, and the world had seemed like a safer place. "It's over, Mama," he whispered. "Nobody's going to hurt us anymore." The official investigation into Dr. Edward Langley's death concluded that the physician had been killed during a failed burglary attempt at the Carter residence. Captain Hargrove's report noted that Langley had escaped from Confederate custody and was apparently attempting to steal money and valuables to fund his flight from justice when he was surprised by the homeowner and fatally wounded in the ensuing struggle. Eliza Carter corroborated this version of events, testifying that she had awakened to find an intruder in her home and had used her late husband's shotgun in self-defense. The fact that Langley had been found with stolen medical instruments and a bag containing items taken from Dr. Brooks's office supported the burglary theory and suggested that the escaped prisoner had planned a series of crimes to finance his escape. William Carter's role in the incident was described as minimal, a frightened child who had hidden during the confrontation and had only emerged after the danger had passed. Captain Hargrove noted that the boy appeared traumatized by the violence he had witnessed, but recommended no further action beyond ensuring that he received appropriate care for the psychological effects of his ordeal. The Confederate Army's investigation into Langley's medical experiments was quietly closed, with findings that the physician had acted without proper authorization and had falsified records to conceal unauthorized research. The fact that Langley was now dead eliminated the need for a military trial, and officials in Atlanta were eager to avoid publicity that might damage confidence in Confederate medical services. William's official status was corrected. Records were amended to show that he had survived the mine collapse and had received legitimate medical treatment for his injuries. The mining company provided a settlement payment to the Carter family in compensation for the traumatic experience, allowing Eliza to relocate with her children to Athens, where she could find work in textile manufacturing that supported the war effort. But the true story of what had happened in the company infirmary and what had occurred in the Carter kitchen on the night of August 3rd remained known only to Eliza and William themselves. The boy never spoke about his months of medical torture, and Eliza never questioned the details of Langley's death. Some secrets they both understood were better left buried. The Carter family's relocation to Athens marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. William found work in a textile mill, his small size and quick reflexes making him valuable for operating machinery that required careful attention to moving parts. His supervisors noted his unusual maturity and his ability to remain calm under pressure, qualities that made him an excellent worker despite his young age. Eliza married again in 1863, wedding a widowed mill supervisor named George Ramsey, whose own children had died of typhus during the war. Ramsey was a kind man who asked no questions about William's scars or the family's past at Redstone, accepting them as refugees from the violence that had touched every family in the South. As the months passed, William's physical health continued to improve. The scars from Langley's medical experiments gradually faded, though they never disappeared completely. More importantly, the boy's psychological recovery progressed steadily. He began to smile again, to play with other children in their Athens neighborhood, and to show interest in activities beyond mere survival. But those who knew William well noticed changes that the cave-in's aftermath had left in his character. He possessed an unusual awareness of human nature, an ability to read people's motivations and intentions that seemed uncanny in someone so young. He could sense when adults were lying to him, when situations were becoming dangerous, and when people around him were experiencing fear or pain. This heightened perception served William well in the dangerous environment of wartime Georgia. He avoided recruitment by Confederate press gangs who were desperately seeking young workers for military support roles. He steered his family away from neighborhoods where violence was escalating. He seemed to possess an instinct for survival that kept them safe during the chaotic final years of the Civil War. In 1864, as Union forces occupied Georgia and the Confederacy collapsed, William Carter was 16 years old and working as a shift supervisor in the Athens textile mill. His experiences had aged him far beyond his chronological years, but they had also given him skills and knowledge that would serve him well in the post-war Reconstruction period. William never returned to the Redstone Ironworks, though the site remained operational under Union control after the war. When asked about his reluctance to revisit the scene of his near-death experience, he would simply say that some places held too many memories to be comfortable. Those who pressed him for details found that he could become remarkably evasive when discussing his past. Eliza Ramsey, she had taken her new husband's name, sometimes watched her son with a mixture of pride and concern. William had survived experiences that would have destroyed most adults, and he had emerged as a capable, intelligent young man with a promising future. But she also recognized that his survival had come at a cost that might never be fully understood. The boy who had trusted Dr. Langley's authority completely no longer trusted anyone without careful observation and consideration. The child who had once been open and talkative had become someone who shared his thoughts sparingly, and only with people who had proven themselves worthy of confidence over time. Most significantly, William had learned that sometimes good people must do terrible things to protect themselves and others from evil, a lesson that would shape his approach to moral questions for the rest of his life. In 1866, William married Emily Harper, the daughter of an Athens merchant who had prospered during the Reconstruction boom. Emily was attracted to William's quiet competence and his reputation as someone who could be trusted to handle difficult situations without losing his composure. Their marriage produced 3 children, all of whom grew up hearing stories about their father's survival of the mine collapse, but never learning the full truth about what had happened afterward. William became a successful businessman, eventually owning several small manufacturing enterprises that employed dozens of workers in the growing industrial economy of post-war Georgia. His employees respected him as a fair but demanding boss who understood the dangers of industrial work and insisted on safety measures that other employers often ignored. But perhaps most remarkably, William Carter became known throughout Athens as someone who was especially protective of children in dangerous situations. He frequently intervened when he suspected that young workers were being abused or exploited by their employers. He funded a small school for orphaned children whose parents had died in mining or factory accidents, and he was known to respond with surprising violence when he encountered adults who threatened or harmed children under their care. Local law enforcement learned to handle William carefully when such incidents occurred. His reputation as a survivor of extraordinary hardship, combined with his status as a respected businessman, usually protected him from serious legal consequences when his interventions became physical. More importantly, most officials recognized that William's actions, while sometimes extreme, were motivated by a genuine desire to protect the vulnerable rather than by criminal intent. The medical records from William's treatment by Dr. Langley were never recovered. Captain Hargrove's final report mentioned that most of Langley's research materials had been destroyed during the physician's escape attempt, though historians have speculated that some documents might have been deliberately suppressed to avoid embarrassing questions about Confederate medical practices during the war. In 1891, 30 years after the cave-in at Redstone, a reporter from the Athens Daily Banner attempted to interview William Carter about his remarkable survival story for a feature article about local Civil War experiences. William politely declined to be interviewed, explaining that he preferred to focus on the future rather than reliving traumatic events from his past. But the reporter's research had uncovered some interesting discrepancies in the official records. Confederate Army medical reports from 1861 contained references to experimental treatments being conducted on mine accident victims, though the specific details had been redacted or removed. More intriguingly, post-war medical journals contained several anonymous articles describing unusual cases of accelerated healing and pain tolerance that seemed to match William's experiences at Redstone. When the reporter presented these findings to William and asked for comment, the businessman's response was brief but pointed. Some medical experiments should never be repeated, and some doctors should never be trusted with another patient. The war is over, and so are the men who conducted those experiments. That's all that matters now. The reporter's article was never published. According to newspaper records, the story was killed by the editor after receiving complaints from several prominent Athens citizens who felt that dredging up wartime controversies would be harmful to the city's reputation and economic development. William Carter died in 1922 at the age of 74, surrounded by his children and grandchildren in the comfortable Athens home he had built with the profits from his business enterprises. His obituary in the Daily Banner described him as a respected community leader and survivor of the Redstone mine disaster, but made no mention of his medical treatment or Dr. Langley's experiments. But among the papers found in William's desk after his death was a locked metal box containing a collection of items that his family could not immediately identify. The box held several old photographs showing medical instruments and surgical procedures, a stack of handwritten notes in what appeared to be a physician's handwriting, and a small leather journal filled with observations about pain tolerance, healing rates, and human endurance. William's eldest son, Henry Carter II, initially planned to donate these materials to the Georgia Historical Society as part of his father's papers. But after reading through the documents more carefully, he decided that some aspects of his father's experiences were too disturbing to be preserved for public examination. On a cold January morning in 1923, Henry Carter built a fire in his backyard and burned every document, photograph, and note that related to his father's medical treatment in 1861. As he watched the flames consume the last evidence of Dr. Langley's experiments, he thought about the man his father had become, and the price that survival sometimes demands from those who refuse to surrender to evil. The ashes were scattered in the wind, carrying away the final secrets of what had really happened in the company infirmary at Redstone Iron Works during the summer of 1861. Today, the site of the Redstone Iron Works is preserved as a historical park where visitors can explore the restored blast furnaces and learn about Georgia's industrial contribution to the Civil War. Tour guides tell stories about the dangerous working conditions in 19th century mines and the courage of families who risked everything to support the war effort. But they don't mention William Carter's survival of the cave-in, or Dr. Edward Langley's medical experiments, or the violent confrontation that ended with a child administering his own form of justice to a man who had tortured him in the name of medical science. Some stories, the park officials explain when asked about local legends and folklore, are too controversial or unverified to be included in official historical presentations. Yet sometimes late at night, when the park is closed and the restored buildings stand empty in the Georgia darkness, visitors have reported hearing sounds that seem to come from beneath the ground. Sounds like picks striking stone, or timbers creaking under immense weight, or voices calling for help from places where no one should be trapped. And occasionally, very occasionally, someone claims to hear other sounds echoing from the area where the company infirmary once stood. Sounds like metal instruments clinking against each other, or footsteps moving carefully through darkened rooms, or the quiet voice of a child asking questions that no child should ever have to ask. The park rangers dismiss such reports as imagination, or the effects of wind moving through the restored buildings, but they also make sure to conduct their security rounds in pairs, and they've learned not to investigate unusual sounds too closely when they're walking alone through the historical site after midnight. After all, some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some graves are better left undisturbed. The boy that science couldn't kill had learned that lesson well, and perhaps he's still teaching it to anyone brave enough or foolish enough to listen carefully in the darkness where his story began. Thank you for joining us on this haunting journey through one of America's darkest historical mysteries. If this tale of survival, betrayal, and justice gripped you, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this video with someone who loves diving into the shadows of the past. What do you think? Were William Carter's actions justified, or could there have been another way to stop Dr. Langley? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from. Until next time, keep exploring the stories that history tried to bury. See you in the next video.